What's the craziest way you've heard of someone making money? Story 1. I've heard of crazier, but a guy I know, a friend of my mother's, went to Texas over 30 years ago. We're from Norway, and he noticed that every single garden had a trampoline. Almost all of them were Jump King, the circular ones with the blue mat. He went to the HQ, bought 10, and brought them back to Norway. Within days they were sold, so he ordered 50 more. The same thing happened. He ended up becoming the only importer and now has God knows how many millions to his name. Story 2. In Air Force squadrons, it's normal to have a snack bar run by junior members, usually quite poorly. At one base where I was stationed, a maintenance squadron had an airman who was so bad at maintenance that they just put him on permanent snack bar duty. Surprisingly, Airman Can't Turn a Wrench did really well with his new task. The snack bar was suddenly well-stocked and organized. Since it was so well supplied, many maintainers started buying their lunch there instead of going to the dining facility on the other side of the base. Even the aircrew would stop by after a sortie because the selection was so good. At the end of the year, he reported a profit of nearly $3,000 to the Squadron Booster Club. They were thrilled and kept him running the snack bar for the next few years. He quietly managed it until his enlistment ended, received an honorable discharge, and returned to civilian life. Before leaving, he trained a new airman to run the snack bar the same way he did. The new guy kept it going, and at the end of the year, he reported a profit of about $18,000. You guessed it, the first airman had embezzled all of it in untraceable cash, and since he'd cooked the books with zero oversight, they couldn't prove a thing. Plus, once he was out of the military, they no longer had jurisdiction. The squadron leadership realized they'd look like complete idiots if they reported it, so they did the sensible thing and just kept their mouths shut. This kid didn't do a lick of work his entire enlistment and walked away with his GI Bill and a duffel bag containing the better part of 50 grand in cash. Kaiser Soze level stuff for a 19-year-old. Story 3. My dad invested $50,000 in a company that gave people money in exchange for becoming the beneficiaries of their life insurance policies. Basically, when elderly people wanted access to their life insurance before they died, this company would give them about a quarter of the policy's value, and when they passed away, the company would collect the full amount. So they were only out a quarter, and they'd get the rest. My dad even got a little plaque with the names of the 3 people whose policies he partially owned, along with regular updates on their health. It was really morbid, especially since he wouldn't see any return until they died. So here's my dad, essentially hoping 3 old people would die, listening to updates about their rapidly declining health. Then suddenly, one of them started getting better at 92. Then, lo and behold, the other 2 started getting better as well. They were up and walking around, traveling with their kids, enjoying the money he'd partially given them. This would be good news to most of us, but my dad was fuming, especially because the company began calling and asking for more money, claiming, "They're living longer than expected, and we need additional funds to cover their insurance premiums." Not paying the few hundred a month would mean forfeiting his original $50,000 investment. To him, that wasn't an option. These people were in their late 90s. Surely they'd die soon, right? 6 months later, my mom finally told him, "Stop that." He gave up the $50,000 and stopped paying. 2 years later, he received a letter about a class action lawsuit. Turns out, there were never any old people with big life insurance policies. The whole thing was a scam. The guy behind it made off with about $20 million and fled to Chile or somewhere. Serves my dad right, gambling on old people dying. Unreal. That's the craziest way I've ever heard of someone making money. Story 4. Back in 2005, I had a night job working for Bank of America. After about a year, I decided to go back to school. I was 20 at the time, and asked if I could take a leave of absence and only work during winter and summer breaks. They had never done that for anyone before, but they agreed because I had been the department's top performer for several months. So I left, and when I came back a few months later for Christmas break, I worked a couple of weeks through the new year. At first, I didn't notice I'd been overpaid because I was used to the YDD figure being somewhat large. But then I realized that there had only been a week or 2 of 2007 at that point. They had paid me for the entire time I was away at school. My 1-2-week check had 650 hours of overtime on it. At $13 an hour, I grossed $8,500 for those 2 weeks. Payroll mistakes were surprisingly common, so I told my boss the next night at work. She said they'd reclaim the overage on the next payday. I reminded her it was my last week before heading back to school and there wouldn't be a next one. All she said was, "They always find you." When the school year ended that May, I realized I couldn't handle working nights anymore. I quit over the phone by voicemail. A couple of weeks later, I got a letter from the payroll company, Fidelity, politely asking if I could please return their $4,700. It's worth noting that I had waited months before spending any of that money. First a little for an emergency, then some more I figured I could cover if they tracked me down, and eventually, I realized I basically didn't need to work for the 2 semesters I was away. So, of course, I ignored their letter. Then I ignored the next one. Then they stopped asking. I never faced any legal action, and nothing ever showed up on my credit score. And that's the story of how I accidentally defrauded the second largest bank in the country. Story 5. A friend of mine used to run a coffee wagon. Big deal, you say? What's so crazy about that? Well, this was back in the 90s, when coffee trucks were rare in Vancouver. The city council didn't want to issue licenses, and the health department was extra strict about hot water, hand-washing stations, and other requirements. But once he finally got his permit, my friend didn't just park on a random street and sell to the public. He'd call film production offices, politely ask to be faxed a call sheet, then show up at as many shooting locations as he could fit in a day to serve coffee to the crews. His specialty coffees were actually good, far better than the standard dishwater craft services usually offered. So the moment he parked, people would line up. Department reps would come with 10 to 20 orders at a time for double shot, triple syrup mochas. If you were behind the grip or lighting crew's runner, you might wait over an hour just to get your coffee. It was a brilliant setup. Over the course of a workday, he'd have multiple captive markets of 100+ people each. He made especially good money during night shoots, when a crew of 150 was desperate to stay awake. He'd often work 36 hours straight, a 12-hour day shift, then crash on a pad and sleeping bag on the floor of his truck during the night shoot, leaving a sign on the counter that said, "Yell for service." Then he'd change his shirt and be ready for the next morning's breakfast run. The business was so profitable that he bought a house in pricey Vancouver, sold the truck, and retired at 40 after only 6 or 7 years of slinging coffee. His timing was perfect too. Just as competitors started moving in, production offices stopped giving out location and call time info after a couple of vendor fistfights broke out on set. Strangely enough, my friend eventually got bored with retirement. Using his industry contacts, he became a trainee, and now he's a sought-after prop buyer. Story 6. A member of our sales department booked a deal for one of our software products, and the reported revenue was over $100 million. With our company's standard 10% commission, he was set to make an absolute fortune. Everyone signed off on the deal, and once he got his commission check, he abruptly left the company. The product in question handled provider credentialing. The client was a group of health insurance plans from a specific state. The idea was that our company would make money by credentialing the providers who contracted with those plans. It saved the insurance companies money because we charged less per provider than it would cost them to do it themselves, and we made money because we could credential each provider once but sell that information to multiple plans, all of whom were locked into getting the data from us. A couple of months after the deal closed, one of the clients noticed that the number of providers they were expected to credential was massively inflated. By a lot. In fact, there weren't even that many providers in the entire state, or in several surrounding states combined. It turned out the deal wasn't worth anywhere near the original estimate, and no one could prove where those inflated numbers had come from. They also couldn't track down the salesperson, who had disappeared with a massive commission check. Our company had to absorb the loss, and the entire product line eventually collapsed due to lack of funding. Story 7. This one isn't necessarily crazy, but it's legitimately infuriating, and it pisses me off that it's legal. I know a family that started a company signing up elderly people for Medicare plans. They did so well that all their children quit their own careers to join in, even a successful lawyer and a finance guy. The problem is, these people prey on the elderly. As someone with parents and in-laws, I've personally seen the damage these companies do by signing up patients in the early stages of dementia. While they're still competent enough to live at home alone, they're clearly not fully coherent in conversations or capable of understanding the long-term impact of these decisions. These companies don't care. They sign them up, take their commission, and move on. Meanwhile, Family members are left spending countless hours trying to clean up the mess. I'm against the death penalty, but there are times, based on what I've personally gone through and the stories I've heard, when I wouldn't mind seeing people who take advantage of the elderly face immediate execution. Story 8. I worked at a Renaissance fair a while back, and on certain weekdays the fair was open for local elementary and high school kids. Security got called after one of the school employees noticed a long line in front of a single portable toilet. There were plenty of others not in use, but every boy was lined up for that one. Turns out, an entrepreneurial student had decided to expose himself for cash. The cops were called, since no one knew if something bigger was going on, but honestly, that wasn't even the worst incident that day. A sign hanging in front of one of the shops fell off and hit an adult on the head. They survived, but it looked awful. Story 9. My kid saved money for an entire year to buy himself a 3D printer, and it came with some filament. He made a few Star Wars themed bathroom signs and hand-painted them, then started making keychains. He asked his aunt to sell them at her events, and he makes anywhere from $50 to $70 at each one. He's done 4 events so far. He bought new filament and now sells brightly colored keychains for $5 and zipper pulls for $2, while his sister sells stickers for $2. Both of them are making decent money. I'm proud of them, not just for selling, but because they don't spend their money right away. My son has already started investing, and in the past year he's built up $2,000. He's currently saving for a microscope. The investments are for college, not my idea, but I'm definitely not upset about it. He also adds money from his birthday, good grades, Christmas, and so on. If you're curious, my daughter is 13 and my son is 11. Today he made a cereal dispenser out of a cardboard box and a bottle lid just for fun. And mind you, both of these kids love watching videos and playing video games. You wouldn't think they had a small business. At the rate they're going, I could totally see them making bank. I'm really proud of them. Story 10. So there's this MS-13 gang member my buddy works for. The guy owns a company that houses the criminally insane. After my state shut down its mental health institutions, these kinds of companies became the ones responsible for taking care of them. Basically, the state pays him anywhere from $70,000 to $250,000 a year per person, depending on how dangerous they are. He can house one person per bedroom, with just a single minimum wage worker looking after the entire house. And these houses? They can be right next door to your family home in a regular neighborhood, occupied by people guilty of some pretty heinous crimes. In just 1 year, he can pay off a house. Then he finances another, moves the patients into the new one, and converts the paid-off house into a rental. Last I heard, he had over 150 fully paid-off houses. Story 11. Since I was a teenager, I've been forking out good money for cardboard with pictures on it. In my early teens, they were just pictures. Later on, I wanted pictures I could actually play a game with. Eventually, after a couple of decades, I realized that someone was making real money off this nonsense. In fact, lots of people were. The artists, the graphic designers, the manufacturers, the game developers. I wanted to be one of those people. So I got to work figuring it out, reverse engineering the process. So far, I've learned a lot, including the fact that this is difficult, which is why there are so many not great versions out there. And this is expensive. But I also figured out how to make something that makes people say, I want this. Where and when can I buy it? And I figured out how to produce enough of them so that even if I only sold a portion, I'd recoup the costs of making them in the first place. So, the craziest way I've heard of people making money is cardboard. Story 12. I design and order medals for local events, which brings in $1,000 to $2,000 every month with minimal effort. I have an Illustrator file with various elements I can mix and match to create tailored suggestions for clients, which I then send to them. Once they approve, I place the order through Alibaba. Clients pay me directly for the design work and coordination with the manufacturer, while they handle the payment to the manufacturer for the actual medals, including shipping, taxes, and so on. At this point, it requires very little work on my end. I spend maybe an hour total on each order. I don't have a website or do any advertising. Everything comes through word of mouth and email. I could probably expand the business, but I'm content with the easy earnings and low stress it brings on top of my day job. Story 13. There are whiskey groups on Facebook that are basically just gambling. You can buy spots to win a bottle, and the winner is determined by the Illinois lottery drawing. which happens twice a day. Here's where the crazy money-making part comes in. Sometimes even just buying a spot, giving you a 1 in 10 chance of winning, can be insanely expensive. So people run satellites, which are raffles done via a random number generator. The winner of that raffle earns a spot in the actual bottle raffle. Certain people are approved to run these randomizers across the groups, and they get tipped generously. Considering that some spots are worth over $1,000 and potentially 10 times that if the winner gets the bottle, people are usually more than happy to tip if their satellite entry pays off. I got to know a couple of these randomizer operators, and several of them make 6 figures just from tips. They sit at their computers for 12+ hours a day, waiting to be tagged, and run hundreds of these a week. During COVID, some of them were running over 100 a day. Story 14. In NYC, before cell phones were common and phone booths were everywhere, some homeless guys had a pretty wild hustle. Back then, long-distance calls were expensive. Even calling just a few miles outside your area could cost a few dollars for only a couple of minutes. These guys would hang around Port Authority, Grand Central, and other high-traffic spots where hundreds of thousands of people passed through every day, and they'd sell a phone call at a payphone to anywhere in the country for just $1. You could stay on the phone as long as you wanted. How did they pull it off? At the time, prepaid calling cards were huge. You'd buy a card, punch in a 10 or 12-digit PIN, then dial the number you wanted. These guys would watch people enter their PINs and memorize them. Then they'd approach others and sell cheap calls using those stolen numbers. I literally saw guys standing 10 feet away, watching someone dial, and then immediately pitch their service to someone else. Crazy. It's actually the reason payphones eventually got those little plastic shields around the keypads to stop people from seeing which numbers you were pressing. Story 15. A guy at a major company in a primary industry here was about to be made redundant. He had a friend in senior management who created a position for him just to keep him employed. The job? Counting and reporting the number of pallets in storage. The thing is, the company had automated this years earlier. Every pallet had a barcode that got scanned in and out, and the software kept a running tally. Sure, it might be off occasionally, but never by more than about 0.1%. He never had more than a few hours of actual work to do each month. So he spent most of his time going to sports events or traveling around the country. Meanwhile, he was making just shy of 6 figures annually in this middle management role. It went on for a few years until a new CEO came in and did another round of redundancies, which finally included him. Story 16. Oh my god, this one is low-key genius. An old online acquaintance of mine once confessed to making money by going online and sending fake nudes to older men for cash. And by fake nudes, I mean pictures that didn't actually feature her or her body at all. She said she found the photos on adult sites, posted by consenting women, so they weren't illegally obtained. I couldn't help but think it was incredibly smart. According to her, sometimes she was making $300 per fake nude. She even linked me the site in case I wanted to try it out, but I declined. Still, I had to give her props for coming up with such a quick way to make money. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.